tonight we're going to focus on building the right thing, but there's also going to be a technical side to it as well, which we're going to get into. So we're going to talk about specification by example, and it's got lots of different names, which we'll get to. But what we're going to look at is we're going to look at a collaborative approach for finding out what your requirements are. Now, I tend to come from the Agile world, so we call them user stories, but you can call them George. It doesn't matter. What does matter is that we get some really good acceptance criteria for those, and they've got concrete examples. These are your functional tests, not your unit tests, very high level ones, and they're going to be executable. So why does that matter? Well, it matters because documentation stinks and it gets out of sync with what you're doing. But if you've got executable specs, then if your code and your specs ever get out of sync, the tests fail and you know right away. And it may have been because some requirement changed that you put in your code and you didn't put in your specs, but more likely it's because you did something that broke what you were trying to do. Okay, what was needed by your business or your warfighter or whoever your customer is. Okay. So there are many names that we use for the same thing here. Specification by example, behavior-driven development. That tends to be the word that most developers use. Acceptance test-driven development. That's a word, a phrase that often formal testers use. Story-driven development and story testing. Story testing was one of the early names for this and one of the earliest executable versions. But we're going to call it specification by example, and later we'll talk about BDD, behavior-driven development. The differences between these is very, very little. Okay. As I say, I come from the Agile space, and we call our requirements user stories. And some people go into a great deal of consideration about whether it's a story or an epic or a novel or who cares. They're all just different sizes of the same sort of thing. And the smaller the size, the more, concrete it is. But let's look at an example of one. What is a good thing to have? Well, you need to have a title. Now, if you're using one of these Agile project management tools or what have you, they'll give you JIRA numbers, or rally numbers or version 1 numbers. Do not use that. Title, something anybody walking into or getting onto Zoom or Teams or WebEx or whatever with you can see from the title what you're talking about. 2 to 7 words, good size. Then we're going to talk about why. Why do we care about this? Who is our customer? Who is the user of this thing? And what is it we're trying to build? If you're familiar with the classic Agile phrasing, this is a little bit different, and I'll tell you why this is a better approach. You'll see as we go. Now, Ron Jeffries, who is a really great guy and really smart, calls the approach to trying to get these things the 3 C's: the card, the conversation, and the confirmation. The reason I call it a card is because originally user stories were written on 3x5 cards. Conversation is kind of obvious, and the confirmation is now how we get those specs into detailed form. This comes from extreme programming. This, by the way, is an example of at least it was at the time, of how the Fannie Mae mortgage calculator actually worked with real data. And the data is going to be important. So let's think about this. We want to have multiple points of view when we're looking at these stories, or we're looking at these requirements, or we're looking at these Georges, whatever you want to call them, these things that we're trying to build for somebody. We want the point of view of the folks developing the code. It's our wizard hat here. We want the point of view of whoever your end customer is, your business person. If you're in the military, your war fighter, whoever that is. The bow tie is my symbol for that. And we want a testing point of view, and whether or not, if you have formal testers, great. If you don't have formal testers, then one of your devs or somebody else needs to put on this, and how can this go wrong point of view. Okay. And most devs don't think that way. Most devs think happy path. So this mindset is important. Now, what are we looking at? Who's going to use this? How is it going to be used? How do we describe it? How do we build it? How do we confirm, and this is where our specs come in, that it's going to work? And do we really need this thing? Important question. And of course, how do we break it into smaller pieces? Now, this approach of pulling these three mental concepts, and sometimes you'll need to bring in a database person or somebody else with expertise in addition. It may be 4 amigos, it may be 5. Ideally, and in the mob programming environment, it's the whole team, including your business folks. But you at least need these multiple points of view. And we're going to get specific examples with concrete data. We're doing this from the outside in. And that is where, if you're familiar with behavior-driven development, that's where that concept is also as an outside in. Unit tests
Camille,
are kind of the other way around. Yes?
couple of things. Outside in can also be thought of as the London School of TDD.
Good point.
And the other thing is that the who wants what and why they want it actually has a name. It's called the Connextra pattern, which
Okay.
I didn't know for the longest time, but discovered it and have been able to quote it since.
Excellent points, Bob. Okay, so let's focus on the why. Because that's our business person. So traditional user stories, if you're familiar with those, are as a I want so that puts the why last. That's a mistake. You want to put the why first. Why is that important? Well, 1, it gets left out. 2, it's useful for prioritization. And 3, when you focus on the why, you may discover other things are different. Now, one of the things, remember, that we want to, and focusing on the why, is, do we need this? Why are we doing it? So this particular example here is from a Standish study in 2002. Things have improved slightly, but not a whole lot. The Standish group interviewed thousands of companies, tiny ones, huge ones, intermediate ones, profit, nonprofit, government, all sorts. And what they found in fully developed applications, things that were delivered to the end users, we're not talking about things that were shelfware or not delivered, is that 20% of those features that people asked for were really, really valuable. They were often used. They were always used. And 64% of them were either never used or rarely used. So you can get a lot of value just about thinking and prioritizing and not doing what is mostly waste. Now, once in a while, some of those things that you never expect to use, you must have. Sometimes it's for regulatory purposes. Sometimes it's the emergency shutoff software that controls a nuclear power plant. Never hope to use it, but it needs to be there. but most of the time, that's just garbage you don't need. So the first thing you can do into becoming more efficient is to get rid of that. And besides which, your end customers, your business people, your warfighters, whoever they are, your consumers, the nonprofit folks that you're working for, they will come up with new things that they want, which are going to be more important than what they said they wanted 6 months ago. Anyway, so deliver when as fast as you can, good stuff, and get feedback on what's really valuable. Okay, so that's an important part of the why. Now, I mentioned that how we do this why is also important to put it first. So here's a classic format. As a software team manager, I want the application to be free of SQLs so that my app will pass check marks. Check marks, if you didn't know, is one of the software tools that checks for things like SQL injection and various other possible security issues. So why is it important to pass that? Well, because passing it prevents security threats and cyber attacks. Why is that important? Because successful cyber attacks put the business at risk. Ransomware, data breach, and other things. Why does that matter? Because if we don't protect it, we lose money on our investment. Okay? Business people care about that. So value last. Don't do that. Turn it the other way around. And when you turn it the other way around, in order to protect my investment from cyber attacks, as a stockholder or whomever the appropriate business user is, I want my application to be free of SQL injection and a variety of other things as well. But putting that why first changes everything. We've changed who our user is. Here's another one. Now, hopefully you don't have to write little stories or things to refactor your code, yet you refactor it as you go. But let's say that in some cases that you did. And so our story title, Refactor Big Ball of Mud. As a programmer, I want to refactor the big ball of mud code so that my code is simpler. And your business person goes, don't care. Okay? Because they don't understand why that's important. The why needs to be there. So why is it important that code's simpler? Because simpler code is easier to change and maintain. So why is that important? Because we can create new features faster than code is easy to change and maintain. And why is that important? Because we can bring new features faster to market at lower cost. Oh, hey, there's something a business person cares about. You can do this with anything that you're trying, that the why has been put. So always put it in front. So in order to deliver new features at a lower cost, as a CFO or some other applicable user, I want the big ball of mud code refactored. So putting the why first matters. Now let's look at who. Now there are all kinds of who's out there, depending what your customer is. And we're going to look at some examples, assuming that there's some sort of taxi service, this is kind of not exactly an Uber, but it's something or other that uses local taxis, and maybe they use Uber or not. We have a couple of different types of people. By the way, I like to alliterate names of these personas that we call them, because there's more than one type of person that uses your app. And it's really easy to remember the name if it's alliterated. I picked that up from David Hussman, who maybe invented it, maybe picked it up from someone else. Anyway, so Laura, she's local, and her description, there's many ways to do personas, by the way. This is one of the simplest. She's a local traveler. travels alone. She goes to and from home, mostly to the grocery store. She has a preferred taxi service that she likes better than some others. She does some home, but she wants to be picked up at home. The taxi needs to have room for bulky bags and needs to take care that the eggs are not broken. Needs hometown service. Bob Business, on the other hand, needs a taxi service, but he is very different. He's a businessman that travels nationally. He travels alone to and from airports and to his house, of course, and to his hotel. He's usually carrying 2 pieces of luggage. He really cares about receipts because he has the world's worst expense report system that he has to maintain. Laura doesn't care. He also wants early morning pickup. Laura's not a morning person. He needs to book the night before. Laura maybe could book weekly and be happy. He wants room for luggage, and he wants something that will be workable at the airport. Not all services go to all airports. Here's a different type of application. And again, these are both people that use the service, but they've got different needs. So they're different personas. Both of them are going to eat at restaurants or bring people to eat at restaurants. Now, Fred Father, he's a family man, eats out monthly. He's married. He has an 8 and a 14-year-old and a toddler. Some of us might know about having little kids into restaurants. It's an interesting challenge. He's a beer, steak, and potatoes guy. He wants moderate prices, a children's menu, a high chair for that toddler who's always squirming, and he wants same-day reservation. Brandy Banquet's different. She's an event planner. She reserves space months in advance. Weddings, business organizations, fraternal groups, all sorts of things. Okay. And she orders food weeks in advance after she's found out what the guests want. She may bring in entertainment. She wants a private room. She doesn't want to be in with the rest of the mob at the restaurant. She wants her group of people separated. She wants group discounts because she's bringing in lots of people. She wants, in many cases, a dance floor, but maybe not all of them, and a wine list, fine cuisine, vegetarian option, and a buffet option. So some of her events are plated and other events are buffet. So each person we saw here has a description and what they value. Now, what we're going to do, this is our first exercise, is we're going to look at either Jane Job Seeker, somebody trying to get a job, or Russ Recruiter. Okay, and that's somebody trying to hire. And we're going to look at a description for that person and what they value. Now, what would you all like to do? Would you like to work on Jane Job Seeker or Russ Recruiter?
Russ Recruiter has money, Jane Job Seeker doesn't. So target market, Russ Recruiter.
Everybody agree? I don't hear any other voices.
Bob must like a paycheck.
What?
Bob must like getting paid to work.
Well, it's handy, yeah.
And it's okay to hop off mute if you want to and interact, right, Camille?
Yes, please.
It's actually kind of required to be successful tonight.
Yeah. So we're going to want some folks to, we're going to want more than just Bob's voice, please.
Please.
Okay.
Well, Bob does have a lovely voice.
Yes, that may be, but okay. So I'm going to escape from this.
I'll try to do Bob's voice.
Okay. And now, so Russ Recruiter, is that what we all decided on?
Here, here.
Or Jane Job Seeker? Okay. All right. Tell me about Russ. What's he like? What's them? This is where you're supposed to participate, gang.
I'll show my Russ.
Yeah, Russ Recruiter, okay?
He wears
What's it like?
glasses.
Huh?
Wears glasses.
Okay,
Enjoys facial hair.
that's
Plays golf.
plays golf.
Sends lots of emails.
Okay, that sounds like that. Golf, okay.
Uses a Dvorakian keyboard.
Mm,
Now we're all judging him.
That's Camille Coder.
So I'm thinking in terms of restaurant accoutrements, wants a
No,
private
this
dental-
Russ Recruiter, this is for job site.
for Russ Recruiter,
Mm-hmm.
what is it we're saying? What their
What-
characteristics is? or
Tell,
what's
yeah,
it-
what, so let me show you some prior examples. So for Fred Father, being a family man and eating out
Okay.
monthly was relevant. The fact he had kids was relevant. For Brandy Banquet, the fact that she was an event planner was relevant. And that brought into some of the things that she was going to care about. So my guess is wears glasses probably not going to be it, but sending lots of emails might. What are going to be other things about him in relation to being a recruiter that we know about Russ?
For a job site, right? We're building a job site.
We're building a job site, okay? This is
I
He-
missed the pivot too.
what? Sorry,
I missed the pivot too. I was just
Okay,
kind of putting
yeah,
things on the background.
Does he hires software developers?
okay, that sounds relevant.
He doesn't like Canton coders because we do a free career fair and puts them out of business.
Has a business degree, not a computer degree.
Okay,
That's not my experience.
Good. Can we split it and do both? Has a business degree or a computer degree?
Yeah. Most
Uh,
recruiters don't
So
know
a lot of
beans
them have
about software.
humanities degrees too, so
He prefers Firefox.
okay,
Talks to a lot of different people.
it'd be nice if I could spell.
is a
Single.
good time manager.
Single, lives in Amber Apartments.
He has a budget of $6,000 a year to spend on software for recruiting.
Okay. All right,
And that software has to integrate with a lot of things like CRM and LinkedIn, and
mm-hmm.
I can't think of other recruiter sites.
Whoops, okay, so uses linked in, and what else was that?
Microsoft Dynamics.
We're just thinking CRM, customer resource manager or
Right.
relationship manager,
Oh,
APM,
leak
applicant
code,
tracking manager.
because he talks to hire software developers, leet code, LEETCODE.
What's that?
It's a competitive ranking kind of thing for developers. They compete against one another. Leet code.
Oh, okay, so he uses lead code?
Yeah, he uses that to find 10x developers.
Lead code or lead
Lead.
code?
Lead like Haxer.
Like that?
LEET.
LEET, okay, I have
Yes.
not heard of that, excuse me.
Only works from an iPad.
Uses
Oh, he does. Okay.
Yeah.
iPad.
On a cell phone modem.
Okay.
3G.
now we're in the weeds.
Okay, so let's think about how some of these things relate to what he's okay. So it must what if so he uses prefers Firefox. What does that mean that he's going to value? He uses Firefox on an yeah, he can use Firefox on iPad. Sure
Ad
he can.
blockers.
Well, I don't know. I use Chrome on a Mac. I assume you can use Firefox on an iPad.
He probably just wants it to work in Firefox, whatever it is.
Okay, so what does it value as far as the app is concerned?
He likes to use custom plugins from Firefox.
Okay. Okay, so support.
You could have gone more extreme on this. He likes to use Internet Explorer 6 or something.
It won't work on the iPad anymore, Bob.
Okay.
No, for that, I
Alright.
would upgrade to Internet Explorer 8.
So what about emails? How is that going to relate to what it's going to value about this web app we're going to call? Okay.
He doesn't want to send emails anymore.
Okay. Doesn't want to
Good.
send emails manually.
Yep.
Wants.
Automatic email generation or something.
Okay.
That appears real.
It's a good point. Okay. So do we want to have integration within LinkedIn? Is that
He
one of the
wants
things?
single sign-on. He doesn't want to
Ah.
remember his passwords.
Just I'll put single sign on. Okay.
You can see the sales pipeline.
What's that?
You can see the steps in the pipeline towards closing. A dashboard of status of different racks.
Okay, good. Okay, dashboard. Okay,
Only wants to work 4 hours a day because he likes to play golf.
okay, all right,
That's why he has a cell phone modem, Bob.
okay.
He works between holes. That works between tea times.
Hang on, want sufficient apps.
The reason I said golf is because somebody once told me that lawyers play golf, but programmers play frisbee golf. It sort of sets a level. You know, programmers drink beer, the other ones drink wine. So, you know, drives a good car, plays golf, kind of sets a kind of person.
Doesn't require
With
overtime.
Wears glasses, he needs to be able to zoom because he doesn't have good vision.
Oh, that's a good point.
He needs accessibility.
Okay. Needs Zoom feature. Wants,
So point hotels would do well to do with their shampoo and conditioner bottles. Thank you very much. Plus 50 for me.
okay, this would be actually. Okay. What's important about hiring software developers?
Needs a keyword buzzword count feature.
And a place to get code repositories. Sample code, portfolio. Is this what it's like to be a product manager, Bob? You just get to make stuff up all day?
Okay,
This is what it feels like to. Oh, I see what you're saying. I think we're all poking fun at recruiters that we've known.
James
By
and
the way,
Julie,
you're the
we have a
first
big
group
heart for you.
that's chosen the recruiter. Everybody usually chooses the
Top
person
secret.
that wants to get a job. Okay, uses iPad, so it must work cross platform. Nice.
In horizontal and
Oh,
vertical
and
mode.
Android. Because there's more than one kind of a pad.
But Russ
Okay.
is an iPad person. He's an Apple user at
I
heart.
assume that, and I think it's actually it's lower I, capital P.
Yep.
I think I got that backwards.
I think you now have it correct. Or about to. be.
There we go. That looks better. Okay, obviously,
Is it less than $6,000 a year or has to provide value?
well, his budget is $6,000 a year. What's that relate to actually his budget for software?
It has to add more value to what he's trying to do. So if he
Yeah,
spends $5 on it, he needs to be able to make 6.
Is where you're going, you need to be able to justify $6,000 worth of
Yep.
savings per year.
Yep.
yeah,
There you go. Needs to generate enough money to pay for itself.
That's practical.
Bob, you must be a senior product manager.
God no.
Principal senior? Principal senior associate fellow?
We suggested
Okay.
Rally. We got Jira
all
for that
right.
same reason.
Okay. Does the business degree really trigger anything for folks?
Likes charts.
Okay,
Um,
sure.
I
Might.
meant it to be about they focus on dollars and don't know technology so much, but there are technology ones and there are humanities ones. So
Okay.
the reason I said it,
And what about talking to lots of people? So he wants some feature where that he can directly focus, interview folks.
Interview recommendation feature. How about that?
How about that?
Doesn't want to use his phone either. Just wants to use the iPad.
Okay. So you see how this works. And we probably spent more time than I allocated.
But it was fun,
anyway,
right, Bob?
It was fun.
It was interesting. Yes.
It was different.
the iPad with Firefox on it. Come on, Joel.
Yeah, okay, so this is not the most realistic example, but all right, back to here. Okay. All right, we worked in a group. So now the what? One of the things that it's important to recognize is the difference between the business need and a constraint.
Can you expand on that?
Yeah,
Like, we'll be happy to make a wonderful app, but it's not free. Because we can't make any money on that.
well, okay, so
The customer may want it free, but the stakeholders clearly don't want to do it for
so
free.
constraints can be important,
Okay?
but it's important to recognize which is which. So it is a business need to make money. Okay, that is a business need. At least for most businesses. But let's see, here's an example one. Let's look at the second example. A lot of colleges and universities require that master's degree candidates have to write a thesis. But the real need is that they have to demonstrate mastery of their subjects. And there's more than one way to do that.
Interesting.
A constraint is that you have to use the Oracle database. The need might be that the analyst wants to be able to perform ad hoc queries, and there's several other things that database systems and tools that could do that. Now, if you already have Oracle in place and you're going to pry it away from the DBAs over their cold dead fingers, then that constraint may be a really true thing, but you need to recognize it's not the same thing as your need. You may discover later that there's certain things that maybe MongoDB would be better for. You don't even need a relational database. So recognizing the difference between these two things, a constraint would be what programming language you have to write in if that's already specified. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you
Camille,
have
what
flexibility.
I detect here, tell me if I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
Constraints are closed by nature. Narrow-mindedness, effectively, to put a not nice description of it. And the business needs are more open-ended,
Mhm.
allowing for more flexibility.
But often business folks, and particularly if they've gotten a technical background, don't differentiate between the two. And it's worth bringing that up.
Fair.
Another thing is a difference between a how and a what. This was particularly true when people were, if you've ever seen, if you're old enough to have ever seen the horrible shell statements and some really bad waterfall documentation. Not that there aren't some decent apps that have been written in waterfall, but there's also, I have seen a 9,000 page, and I kid you not, requirement stock in Microsoft Word. Yeah, it was pretty awful.
Wow.
And a lot of that confused the how with the what. So it's important to recognize the difference between the two of them. When you see someone telling you exactly how you have to build something, now, again, you may have architectural constraints that tell you how some things have to be done. But look at the what it is you're trying to build. See, don't narrow the field so much that your developers don't have any room for creativity. That doesn't mean that you can't have standards, but it does remember, it is important to recognize the difference between the two of them. So if the business need is that monetary transactions need to be into tens of billions of dollars, floating point may not be big enough. If it's a very small amount of money, integer where you're counting pennies might be better because it will give you a more accurate number.
When
So
you're
it's
defining requirements, you shouldn't be talking about any of the how at all. That's up to someone else, the developers.
right, but you will see that in certain circumstances. So our next thing is to discuss what these where you have hows and what's confused. Have you seen constraints confused with business needs? Have you ever seen the how you should do something confused with what's really needed? This is a discussion. What
Oh,
example
yes.
can you think of? No one's ever seen this, really?
I've seen it, but I'm creating space for others to contribute.
Okay.
I agree.
Example?
I was seeing if someone else wanted to talk, and we have some new college graduates out here too. So maybe they don't have an experience,
Yeah, you may not have run into this yet.
and hopefully you never will.
If you're lucky, you won't.
So a really concrete example that anyone can wrap their head around, because everyone's had the experience of standing in front of a vending machine and making a purchase.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to describe the business need as what button to push and what label is on it and how to accept money, as opposed to, I need to sell product for XYZ amount and the customer needs to get their product. You didn't say a thing about how they selected it, how they paid, or how they got it. The latter is business need. I need to actually make money, not push the green button in the upper right that has the word Coke on it, and then insert money in the slot with the label so-and-so. That isn't relevant to what, that's relevant to the implementation details, which you don't want to get yourself into.
Other examples?
I worked at a startup where the chief CTO in a startup of 5 believed that we had to scale to 1 million users and had to use a certain technology, although we only had one paying customer. And he was over-indexing on the what of technology versus building features. Simply, people that would give us money would pay. Does that work for you, Camille?
That could be. I mean, you may want to think about how to scale, but that's certainly not where you're going to want to start with.
We had 1 user. We figured by the time we'd have 10, we'd know a lot more.
Uh-huh.
Not a million. We didn't care about a million.
Any other examples that folks have seen?
Scott has never had an example like this, Camille. He's never written a line of code in 30 years.
Oh, yeah, right.
He also talks on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute, Scott.
Yeah, I might have one. So recently there was a team that wanted to extract a piece of their functionality as a shared service.
Okay.
But it was built in an Oracle database, and an architect flew in and said, you can't do it because you've got to switch over to Postgres. All new stuff has to be in Postgres. And was citing business reasons for that rather than, the truth was it's an architectural constraint. Is that
Mhm.
close?
Okay. Yeah, that's a constraint issue.
Mm-hmm.
Was the constraint based on something pragmatic from the business's perspective? Like, we already have a license for Postgres. We don't want to pay the license for X, Y, or Z.
Now, Postgres is free.
Well, there you go.
Oracle is
Oracle is not.
Less than
Oracle is
free.
the exact opposite end of the spectrum. Right.
Yeah, the business need is I don't want to keep paying for expensive databases.
Or the classic one, Camille, is architects who probably aren't writing the code, describing how the code should work. Is that a constraint versus a business need?
Architects who don't write code, in my opinion, are not nearly as good architects as they should be.
But they're welcome here at Canton Coders because as long as you want to be
Because they'll
happy.
get better. They're absolutely welcome. Now, I've known a number of architects who do write code, and they're good. All right. Okay.
Oh, I actually have one too.
Sure.
Place where I was before, we had a bunch of little bugs that needed fix. When we clicked this, it didn't, do the right thing. And the constant reply was, we can't fix that. We need to rewrite everything because it's in VB6. So we'll work on that later.
VB6 is my retirement plan.
Okay. Very good.
I have a.
Yes.
It's sort of tangential, but since I just jump in, let me pretend like I know what's going on for a couple minutes. I've seen a lot of teams that I've worked with and led where they start including the how onto their user stories as requirements because they use story points as an attempt to understand complexity, or let's just say they use something to understand the complexity of the work they're doing. And so the devs themselves start putting in how under their own requirements, because they're like, well, I need, we need to tell the team how complex this is so they know what they're dealing with. You know what I mean?
Well, that's good for a discussion. And in my opinion, the value of story points, where they have value, is in having that discussion. So that's worthwhile them telling them, but not putting in the user story. That's part of a discussion of, well, you could do it this way, or we could do it that way. Oh, this way is a whole lot easier or faster or more secure or whatever, because, and that's part of a good discussion, but that's not a business issue per se.
Speaking of which, if you'd like to donate your extra unused story points to Canton Coders, go ahead and reach out to Bob Allen. He will be giving you a gift receipt of story points.
Okay. All right. Now we're going to work on the confirmation part. Okay. So we've talked about the why, the who, and the what. Now we're looking at how are we verifying that this is true. And the first part of that is to figure out what some of the things are that we might do. So here's another real world example of talking to people. And again, we're collaborating. So in order to show a confirmation of a sighting, a US CERT analyst, I want to mark a sighting as vetting. Now, a sighting is some kind of a malware that somebody thinks they have. And there's this US agency called US CERT, and they examine possible things that are coming in, and they have an app that tells them whether or not it really is dangerous, or whether it was not. Okay. So WannaCry is a sighting viewed by Charlie, a US CERT analyst. You see, and Charlie marks it as vetted. Tracy from Treasury then picks this up and then looks at it. So we're sort of working in our flow as we're discussing this. Searches for sightings that are vetted today. And Tracy sees that WannaCry, which was a really nasty thing. And there's lots more nasty things out there, has been confirmed. From that, we can start creating a whole bunch of executable tests, looking at features, and we're going to use these words a little differently than you perhaps use them, because we're going to talk about Gherkin. We're starting to talk about Gherkin now. And it uses the word feature where some people might use the word user story. Anyway. But again, features come in different sizes. User stories come in different sizes, whatever. So here we have several different ones. Trusted partner finds unvetted. Trusted partner finds a vetted sighting. The analyst vets the sighting, and there's scenarios for unvetted and scenarios for vetted. Okay. And this can be automated. This is not actually the real thing running. This is my software simulating it in the background. This brings us to the cycle. Now we said the specification example by example and behavior-driven development were two words for the same thing. And they have a cycle it goes through, which is very similar to the cycle that test-driven development goes through. Where first we create our scenarios, okay? Then we haven't written any code for. Maybe we create several of them, but anyway, because there is no code, they will fail. This is important. Likewise, in test-driven development, when we're working down in the unit level, We write our tests, whether they're in NUnit or JUnit or RSpec or a bunch of other things. We write them before we write the code and they fail. Then we write the code, and if it's unit level, it's very small bits of code. We clean, and we get that to passing, which is green. And then code gets messy over time and we refactor it. We run the tests again. And the cycle continues until we have enough that we've got that whole feature. And then that feature that we have, or that scenario rather, that's part of a feature, is now passing. And occasionally that needs to also get refactored. And we'll talk about that later in our next session, in how we clean up messy Gherkin that's working. Okay, so there are two sides to this. There's a business facing side and a technology facing side. We're going to focus on the business facing side as we're focusing on Gherkin, but it is important to know that there's more than one. I work mostly with Cucumber. SpecFlow is Microsoft's name for the same thing. I have no idea why it's called SpecFlow. I believe that there's another one that's called Behave. Trying to remember. Python. Yeah, that's the Python version. Anyway, it comes in at least a dozen different programming language variations for the technology facing side. The Gherkin stuff is all the same. At least it's all the same if you're doing it in English. And there are other countries that have translated Gherkin into German or French or what have you. But anyway, so on the business facing side, it's simple English, but it's structured simple English, which we'll talk about. In business terms, it promotes collaboration. It uses examples with concrete data. And I can't emphasize this enough, is the concrete data part. It proves that the business needs have been met, and it's an executable specification. So,
Say, Camille,
yes.
it might be worth mentioning that there is a keyword in the Gherkin language which allows for generic rules, and it's actually the rule keyword.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
We will get to that next session, not this session, but yes,
Okay.
That's a true thing. And it helps organize things. This session, we're going to work on the very basics. Next session, we'll get into lots of other things. And they're modifiable and reusable. Now, on the technology facing side, that's the part that exercises the underlying software. That's the part that you've written it in Java or C# or Python or whatever you've written it in. You can connect it to browsers, networks, database frameworks, and so on. Although generally speaking, you probably want to do less connecting to browsers and more below the browser level. It's object-oriented generally, extensive test libraries. I found out there's even a version that works with Delphi, of all things. Modifiable and reusable. And if you have no preference, whatever, I like using Ruby as the implementation language because it's really easy to learn, but you can, whatever your team is most familiar with, there's almost certainly an implementation in that. This is the Cucumber stack in Ruby, but generally speaking, you'll find a stack similar to that in whatever programming language you're using. On our business-facing side over here, we have features, scenarios, and steps. We'll talk about those in some detail. On the technology side, we have our step definitions written in whatever programming language you're using. It'll have a bunch of support code also written in whatever programming language you're using. A number of things will be automatic, and some automation libraries will use. The Gherkin part will remain the same regardless. And that's the last part we'll talk about technology for the most part. Again, Three Amigos approach, we've mentioned that before. So there's lots of good ways to work on how you figure out what your real requirements are. I like story mapping. That is basically sort of walking people through how your features are going to get used by your customer. And that can create a lot of different smaller stories or smaller requirements, whatever you want to call them. The thing that classical user stories don't mention is that how one story relates to another, and they do relate to each other, and that's important. Anyway, so when we think about these, they can give us a look about what our categories of our test scenarios are. Later, we'll talk about, that will be today, on given, when, then, and we'll want to make sure how there's concrete data. Let's see how that works. Okay, so we talked about, you know, the why, the who, and the what. Now this is a really high level one. In order to conduct banking when the bank is closed as bank customer, I want to use the ATM. Well, that may be true, but that doesn't tell me much. This is gigantic requirement. So breaking it down a little bit further, there are various subcategories. We've got cash withdrawal, check deposit, transfer savings to savings, transfer to checking. This assumes we have multiple accounts. Let's look a little closer at the cash withdrawal. Okay. Again, that's pretty vague. In order to get it on as a bank customer, I want to withdraw when the ATM, cash withdrawal at the ATM. We'll get into breaking that down with our acceptance criteria as something that's not vague. Generally speaking, when you break these down, you want to break them into as much as you can vertical slices. As I mentioned, it's important to know how the stories relate to each other. But we're not talking about separate stories for testing and database changes and stuff like this. Now, you can use these tools for things like that, but that's not our focus here. Our focus here is specifications. So looking at the example of cash withdrawal, in order to get money when the bank is closed as bank customer, I want to withdraw cash from the ATM. This is actually the beginning of Gherkin. We have something called feature. It's got a title called cash withdrawal, and it's got some amount of text. In this case, it's in a user story format. Now, what I'd like you to do, this is our next exercise, is to work on the cash withdrawal story. We're going to identify where cash withdrawal should concede. We're just going to do titles right now, and then where they can fail. Okay? And if we had multiple groups, we'd share it with a larger group, but we're sharing it with everybody as we go. Okay, so let's go to our next exercise. The titles exercise. All right. So what are some ways that we can, some generic ways that we can succeed with withdrawing cash? Think of pieces of it.
Like have money in my hand.
We're working with an ATM. What are we going to do? We withdraw cash from the ATM. What are some, or if you want to think about how it can fail.
Get cash at the ATM with my debit card.
Okay, let's be a little more specific.
Well, you asked for a title.
Yes, no, but I want a little more specific title. This is for scenario. Think of it as a test.
Okay. I'm able to get cash from the ATM with my debit card.
Okay, so that means that the debit card is valid?
So we could do test cases for when it is and when it isn't in order to
Yes,
tease
okay.
that out.
All right, so valid debit card. Card. All right. That kind of makes us think about invalid debit card.
It makes you think what things can cause a debit card to be invalid.
Ah, better still. Okay, what can cause it to be invalid or valid?
Expiration comes
Okay.
to mind immediately.
Card expired.
Chip malfunction.
I could also authorize incorrectly, right? Like enter the wrong PIN,
Okay,
the wrong zip code, things like that.
wrong PIN entered. Okay,
Chip
could be
on the
locked.
card is defective.
Yep, damaged card.
Mm.
okay,
Sufficient balance and insufficient balance.
oh, good. Okay, so draw less than balance and withdraw more than balance, right?
Yep.
Now it's interesting. The bank will actually let me withdraw if I have insufficient balance in many cases, but then they
Oh,
they make me
that's
pay
a
for
different
it.
scenario.
All right.
That's if you've got overdraft protection.
Machine doesn't have enough cash.
Okay.
Insufficient cash in ATM.
Cash in ATM.
Of course, that only happens for Big Money Joel.
Ha ha. It can happen to anybody on a big holiday weekend if everybody's
Huh.
trying to grab money at the same time. Okay.
Hmm. I don't know if this qualifies as a fail or as a feature.
What?
Amount requested is more than allowed to be withdrawn. This machine will
Okay.
never put out
Yes.
more than say $100 or something
Right.
like that. It's a constraint.
Then daily balance.
Yeah, my debit card actually has that fraud protection. Like I can only get 500 a day or something stupid.
Yep. Okay. Daily balance limits are pretty reasonable.
I think someone kind of mentioned this, but like I keep my debit card locked through my app all the time.
Oh,
So if I want to use my debit card, I have to go in and unlock it.
That's
this is something you do at the ATM, or is it something you do?
When I get to the ATM, I use the app on my phone to unlock the card.
Okay, so that's a different app. But let's see.
But it's
card locked.
Yeah, card locked.
by
Card
whatever means, right?
locked. Okay, and there could
Right.
be lots of reasons. You know,
Like you reported it stolen yesterday and then you
Yep.
found it in your
Mhm.
wallet this
could be
morning.
reported stolen. The Fed could be closing in on you because you're racketeering. There are all kinds of things. Or you could have just locked it and not have it unlocked yet.
Right.
Okay.
So this amounts to sketching out test cases.
That's
Good and
exactly
bad.
what this is.
Um,
So while we have these, we probably have the complementary one, card not expired.
It's going to be a really long string of givens.
No, these are separate titles. These are all separate tests.
So if you've got 5 in this category, these things must be true in order for you to be able to get money.
But we write them as separate tests.
Okay.
We write them as separate tests because we want all of our tests. We do not want our tests to be dependent on each other.
I get
Right.
it. Because
Okay.
if you say 5 things must be true and one of them's not, you have to figure out or be told which one is not.
Same thing with, if you're familiar with some of the general rules of unit testing, we don't want 50 asserts. That's also true here. And we'd want to try and keep things as simple. So, for instance, if we had a scenario for the wrong pin entered, some of the preconditions, which we're not going to put in our test, but would be probably in our step definitions somewhere, would be that the card hadn't expired. So we want to test these things discreetly and separately from one another. Make sense?
Yeah.
But anyway, so you see how this general approach works. Okay. And you can think of lots of other things that we could do here. Okay. So let's save this. And yes. All right. What am I doing here? Slideshow. There we go. Okay, so we did that. So for successful withdrawal, there are actually 2 scenarios here that we could have thought about. We thought about less than balance. There might have been one that was equal to balance. You might want to do something slightly different if it's equal to balance. You know, you might want to give someone some warning or what have you. Maybe some banks automatically close the account if it's equal to balance. I think most don't, but we talked about, so there anyway, so we got this first cut, and these are our scenarios, our titles, there are test titles. Okay, now our given, when, then. So what are these things? All tests have 3 parts. Doesn't matter what you're doing it in. If you're using Java, it's called assemble, act, assert. And I think if it's Ruby, it's assemble, activate, assert. But all languages have these 3 parts. If you are a formal tester, you're familiar with things that are preconditions. Then you've got an action or event. And you've got expected results or post conditions. So what is this all about? It's all about, we've got to set up our dependencies ahead of time for our test. And then something is going to make a different outcome than if it hadn't happened. And now we look at what's expected to happen and what side effects there are. And we call this given, when, then. Okay. So our given, and there are going to be a couple other keywords we can use. We can use and to combine things. We do not want to use and with when. Talk about that. So given is our setup, what needs to be true before we start testing our story, when, some action, usually some person or something new, and then what is the expected result and what happens. So how does this work? Our successful withdrawal was our first cut. Now for our second cut, what would that be? Say, given my account has a positive balance. That's vague, but it gives us a second cut. We're going to get more specific. When I withdraw cash, again, still vague, but now we know what we're doing. Then the cash should be dispensed and my balance, this is one of the places that and is acceptable. My balance should be adjusted accordingly. Okay. Now we're going to take some of our scenarios and we're going to add some given when thens to them. And it's okay. And as a matter of fact, for this point, I want you to be a little bit vague on how we're doing this. Okay. And then we will get more concrete. So we had which scenario would we like to start with? Withdraw less than balance, card expired. What would we like to start with? We're
Card
gonna call
expired.
what?
Let's do card expired.
Card expired. Okay. So what's my given here?
Given expiration date of yesterday.
Given card has expiration date of yesterday.
So pedantic, but agreed.
Or you could just say in the past.
I like that easier.
Except you might end up with a test that works on Tuesday that doesn't work on Friday or something. like that.
That's true.
So yesterday
Okay,
might be better.
So
Doesn't matter though for this learning.
when what? When I,
Transaction
submit-
processed.
What?
Transaction processed.
Oh, well, okay, so I've got my card. I'm sticking it into the ATM.
Well, you wrote ATM software. Are you leading the witness?
No, I didn't write ATM software.
Oh,
I've written database management systems.
So it might
I've written
actually
network
be,
software. I haven't written ATM software.
what I'm thinking is the given, the words that we have following given right now should probably be the when statement, and the given part should simply be given customer inserts the card.
There we go.
It's
That's a
upon
good
that,
catch.
doesn't matter what they want to do. They can't do diddly squat. If you insert that card and it's got an expiration date that's in the past, you're out of here. Then the card should be returned and
And they-
perhaps the message displayed, something to that effect.
and you're out of here is displayed on the screen
Yeah, kind of like that.
with Bob.
Okay.
And Bob says you're out of here.
And a verbal "get out" is said.
Yes. In an
Okay, and
internationalization, that might
rude
be the key
message is
word.
displayed because we will get specific on that.
Rude
Okay.
message
Huh?
There you go.
and outer case is electrified.
Okay, so. All right, what's another scenario?
We'd have to,
I mean, do you want a balanced scenario? Do you want an insufficient cash scenario? Choose another scenario. either success or failure.
Hey, Camilla, I think there's one scenario we need to think about. Like, what if the person's a member or not a member? You might get a charge a fee.
What's that?
What if what if you need to check if they're a member of the bank or not a member? If you're not a member and you use ATM, you'll get charged that transaction fee.
Okay,
Oh,
that's true,
member.
but that's another scenario. Right now, I want us to choose from the ones we have here. That's a
Right.
good point.
So you're over to the left.
Absolutely valid point.
Damage card.
Yeah. What's that?
Damage card? Is that okay scenario to select? Or does that have to be from the top three?
Yeah, that's okay.
It's going to be very similar.
It's going to be
the
very similar to the one.
first one.
Well, what if it doesn't fit in?
If it's that damaged, you don't have a problem because the computer, the machine doesn't have to do anything because
Okay.
it doesn't have the card.
Yeah, let's
True.
assume that it's gotten it so that the first line is going to be pretty much the same, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, which speaks to code reuse.
Yes, it does. And this is going to be one of the reasons that when you're working with folks, and one of the reasons you want a good developer or a good tester, but particularly a good dev, trying to get the wording the same. Because if it's slightly different, when you go to create your step definitions, it will create two step definitions that mean the same thing. So it's important to get the wording the same, but we'll talk about that more next time. Okay, so given the card was inserted, and I assume that it can't read the strip, right?
Or the chip,
Okay,
because mostly they're not strips.
Card,
These-
when
Yeah.
card is unreadable, or do you want specific?
yeah, okay, it's unreadable is good for now because
In real life,
not
you would
being
probably,
very specific.
in real life, you would probably have different unreadable states.
Yes, in real life you would. And the card and a different rude message should be displayed.
More ruder.
So should that be when card readable or
Instead of
when card
and.
not readable?
Yes, it should be. Good catch. Card is
not.
unreadable.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go. That fixes that. Let's have another quick one. How about something about money? Balance.
Insufficient cash in ATM is interesting.
Okay.
Pretty much anything that we do from here that isn't just about rejecting the card is going to take more steps simply because there's more involved.
Okay. So this part, we're starting at a different place.
Perhaps we could do that by declaring in the given a valid non-expired or however many qualifications you want to put into it, card is inserted so that we can dispense with all those other reasons we've already tested.
Right. So
Valid transaction has started.
A valid card has been inserted.
But what about PIN code and all that stuff? Don't you want to get past that?
nope. We're just going to ignore that for the moment.
Yeah, if we want to get past all those dependencies, it would just be given the user has requested an amount of money, right?
Good. Given have requested valid amount of money. Okay.
An amount of money.
And yeah, because it's not going to make a difference.
Would I do that exceeds or is that in the when?
I think that's probably going to be a function of the when. when the amount requested exceeds the amount available in the machine, I think is the case we're talking about.
Yep.
Mhm.
I hate when this happens, don't you, Bob?
Yeah,
Daily, I encounter this. Do you?
Go away,
Me neither.
exceeds.
Because I keep requesting only pennies.
I request story points.
Okay.
I think you got a new
Like
product
that.
market fit there.
Okay. Then no money should be dispensed, right?
yes. Well, it might be, what kind of a bank are you? It might be, yeah, we're going to give you as much as we've got and say, I'm sorry, I can't give you the rest. Come back tomorrow.
But then you make all the other customers mad.
I think that would be against a lot of laws on that subject. And
A
yet
different term?
another rude message displayed, right?
Another?
That's-
Poor dad image is displayed.
Okay. All right.
So question for you, Camille.
Yes.
So I see that we're using like somewhat different language in places like sometimes I prefer to use first person language. So I make sure I'm
Mhm.
kind of writing these from a user perspective.
Yep.
Wonder about your thoughts on that.
I like writing things from whenever possible from the first person point of view,
Mhm.
unless you have a specific persona. Now,
Yeah.
for this case, the card is not a persona.
Right.
And anybody using an ATM is pretty much the same persona. But you could
Mhm.
imagine that there'd be other personas that would use the back end of the ATM machine to calculate daily withdrawals of
Mhm.
and so there might be some accounting type of persona and various other things. But for this one, yeah, I would use I whenever we're talking about a person.
So if you
Now
wanted
that's just my
really-
style.
Mhm.
So if the bank wanted to do really personalized banking, it might say something like, where's the $200 I gave you yesterday, Susan?
Okay.
Bob,
Anyway,
now that's PII. Now we're gonna have to go watch an HR training video.
uh-huh. All right.
That's not HIPAA.
Okay. So we've written this from a business point of view, but we're not unambiguous, but we need them to be unambiguous, and we need concrete examples that are binarily testable. This is going to lead to the last exercise we're going to work on today. But let's look about how that changes. So if we remember before, we had given my account had a positive balance when I withdraw cash, then that cash should be dispensed and the balance of my account should be adjusted accordingly. Oops. And so now we take that and we say, given my account has been credited or has a starting balance, or however we want to phrase that, make sure it's the same. When I withdraw $20, then $20 should be dispensed and the balance of my account should be $80. Now, obviously, this was a very small account, and this is where the rubber meets the road in the concrete part. Now, in certain implementations of Cucumber or Spec Flow or whatever, you can actually use the $ with numbers. In other places, you probably want to use the word dollars or pounds or whatever denomination you're working in. The last group I was working with, everything was in pounds. And I didn't have a symbol on my keyboard for that, and I don't know if their Gherkin handles it anyway.
You don't want to know where the key is on their keyboard because it's different than yours.
I'm sure it is. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take one of those too vague second cuts. And we're going to flesh it out with some details. Which one do we want to work on?
Let's do damage card.
Okay. Well, what's the part that we need to be? Definitely rude message needs to be more explicit.
Yeah, that could be turned into a quoted string, or to say the rude message must contain, so that you're not too overly explicit in case you want to modify the language a little bit without breaking your test.
Okay, let's change that to,
I mean,
Uh.
we can make it explicit in more ways than one.
yep, and say, and a message is displayed, maybe saying what? Here,
Damaged, scarred. You might say something else, but that part has to be in the text.
that's good enough.
displayed.
If I could spell it. Okay. And this was really fast. Let's try the insufficient cash.
The way you, the word say should probably be saying.
Displayed saying, yes. There we go. Something like that. This could have better English, but whatever we're going to do, we're going to use the same phrasing. Okay. Okay, how about insufficient, given that I've requested what? How much money?
$4.
Okay. And now let's phrase this and instead of the amount exceeds, and we know that it's going to exceed it, but the amount of money in the machine is $3
Sure.
after we get rid of the second fee. Then let's be explicit here. $0 should be dispensed.
Would you say $0 or would you say money would not be dispensed? Does it matter?
The reason that I would say $0 is because there are some cases where a certain amount of money that's not zero should be dispensed, and we can reuse this statement.
That's what I was thinking as soon as I asked the question.
Yeah. And let's change this one. Oops. What did I just do?
I think you put it back to the way that it was.
You
But
doubled
you
the.
duplicated
doubled
the
the
card
yen.
should be returned.
Oh,
2 copies of that.
that's not what I intended to do.
You could probably generalize this to a rude message or a message displaying so-and-so.
There we go. That's better phrasing. Displaying. There we go.
And in real life, it's usually, I've called it like this view is displayed.
Okay.
That way the graphic artist can figure out the rude message.
Displaying. What should we say? Insufficient funds in ATM? You got a better phrasing?
Transaction canceled, machine error.
Insufficient. Let's see, machine has insufficient bills to meet your request, something. How would you say that in even more terse terms?
ATM has no money.
Sufficient. Funds?
Yeah.
Okay,
ATM is, your request has exceeded the amount the ATM can dispense.
Oh, that's a complicated word.
It doesn't
Right.
matter for the
Keep it
example.
simple.
This is just an example in 10 years when people are watching this.
yeah, okay, so. And you can see what we do, because we're probably going past time already. What we do with card expired. You'd need to, so for dates, you need to give it a specific date. We need to do two things. We need to say what the date on the card was, and we'd also need to say what today's date was.
I think by doing that, you're gonna, by definition, make your test fragile.
That means Bob can do a talk about stubbing and mocking.
That's true. And that's where you do that sort of thing. But we won't do that today, because we didn't get to that one. So we'll go back to this for now. And
Say,
Bob, why don't you give a talk later on stubbing and mocking?
I could do that. Yeah, actually, the way I would, the emphasis that I would put on the examples that we just did
Mhm.
is that all the programmers and all the testers in the room need to keep very much in mind that the audience for that language is not us.
No, it's not. It's
It's the
the business
subject
folks.
matter expert that came to us that wants us to solve their problem.
The parts that we need to do when working with them is we need to, one, make sure, because business folks, like many developers, think in happy path, is we need to work through them through the things that can go wrong.
Together.
Although happy path has to work first or nothing else matters. And to make sure that the language is for the same usage, the same step, the given, the when, the then, the and, whatever is identical. Except for, the numbers or the strings or what have you. Okay. So here's another thing with showing successful withdrawal equal to balance and an insufficient funds. And here's a message, and I should see a message containing insufficient funds. And this is the one equal to balance, and my ending balance should account should be $0. And we will continue further exploration into Gherkin, talking about rules, talking about what makes it good, what makes it bad, how do we simplify it, and many other things in next week. Do you have
Wednesday.
any questions?
18. And bring friends.
Okay.
And if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to turn off the recording now. Hop on slack.gettingcoders.org to talk to Camille directly. Don't even have to email her. She's on there. She'll respond. And it's 100 years from now, and it's 2122. This is how we wrote software. And say hi to my great grandchildren.
All righty.
I'm going to turn off the recording now and
Thanks,
stop
Camille.
streaming.
Okay, what we talked about last time. First of all, we talked about the why, the who, and the what. Before we do specification by example, behavior-driven development, or whatever we want to call this thing, we need to know what we're building. And particularly why we're building it, who we're building it for, and what exactly we're building. Okay, so we talked about that and we went into some detail. If you haven't seen it yet, it will be on the prior video. Then we talked about what's called the 3 C's, a card, confirmation, and confirmation. That is, now that we have this thing, which I will call user story, and you may call a requirement, or you may call it George. We need to have this conversation about what we are building and how we can know that we actually built it right. That's our confirmation. And this down at the bottom is real Gherkin. It's a real thing. And the other thing we talked about is when you do this, you want to get multiple points of view, often called the three amigos. It's a developer point of view, a business point of view, and a testing point of view. If you don't have formal testers, have one of your developers take that testing point of view. Okay, we also talked about, we started getting how we would break that into something which will eventually become Gherkin. That we now have a number of scenarios for our story. You can think of them as tests. Like for instance, successful withdrawal, and that has to have concrete data. Very, very critical. Wonderful thing about it is that these things become executable. And we can very simply take that in a very structured format and turn it into a cucumber scenario. Cucumber is called different things on different platforms. Mostly it's called cucumber. In the C# world, it's called Spec flow. I don't know why. I think Python calls it behave, but there are dozens of different language implementations. Last time we also talked about the fact that there is a business focused side, which is in plain English with some structure to it, which is what we're talking about. That's the Gherkin. And there was also a technical facing side where you have the underlying structure. I don't think we're going to have time to go into that tonight. We might do that in another episode. And here was your basic structure for how to put a Gherkin scenario together. We have this thing called a feature. It has keywords. Scenario, given, when, then. We talked about given, when, then a lot. That's your precondition, some type of event, and your postcondition. If you're developers, you may think of that as assemble, act, and assert. It's got different names in different languages, but that's the most common one that's used from Java. And some of this must be specified exactly this way. This part, I'm happen to use the user story format, but you can put any kind of text in here that's useful for explaining what this thing is about. Scenario, and that's our test title, our given precondition and our postcondition and our event or action. And we can add some various things with ands if we want to. Highly recommend not adding an and to a when, although it's legally allowed in Gherkin. You want to have that event be as unique as possible. Okay. All right. So here's an example of our cash withdrawal. As I say, this is could be in any structure, and it's critical to have our concrete data. So now that we know a little bit about what the structure of this should be, what are the qualities of really good Gherkin? Well, first of all, you want it to be in your business, or if you're in government, maybe warfighter, or consumer, or client, whatever, the language that's natural to your domain. We'll talk a little bit about how that has to be structured. And it needs to be easy to understand. It needs to be unambiguous, very, very clear, with just the right amount of detail and absolutely concrete data that's relevant to your scenario, but not any extra stuff. We don't want it to be too technical or too scripty. Scripty is click here, hit this button, that one. Not too long, should be short. I've seen 100-line Gherkins. Absolutely no, don't want that. You want it to be reusable. Your steps you're going to want to reuse, and the correct use of given, when, then, and other keywords. So let's look at some examples of what not to do. Sometimes it's easier to understand what's good by seeing what's bad. So in this case, we've got something too vague. We have our scenario. It's a book search. It also should have feature, which is missing, but just for the scenario part that we're talking about here. So what kind of book search? Is it successful? Is it unsuccessful? What kind of thing are we looking for it by? What are we searching on? Author, title, ISBN, who knows? What kind of data are we looking for? How in the world are we going to know what book it is? And what's the appropriate information? What should we specifically see on our results? So way too vague. Now, this is not vague. So that problem's gone away, but now we've got stuff in here that is way too technical. You can see that we're talking about stuff that's inside a database, and those are some keys and foreign keys. That's the ID and the author ID. But way too much stuff. We're also talking about that the page should contain. We don't want to specify that. That assumes it's on the web. Often you'll want your Gherkin scenarios that you're running, your tests to be below the browser. That you can write them to the browser, but you don't want too many of those. We want to follow the testing pyramid, which I mentioned in a previous discussion, which you can find on Canton Coders about all the things about testing that they didn't teach you in computer science.
We'll put the link in the bio.
Okay, sounds good. Anyway, and you can see this web. Okay, so way too technical, not good. Now this is less technical. This is better. And it's not vague, that's good, but it's still too scripty because we're talking about the bookstore homepage and I'm filling in a search field and I click on search, too scripty. Okay, this isn't scripty and it does get information, but it's got more detail than we need. Yes, this information is probably in our database on publisher and ISBN, but we're not searching by publisher and ISBN. We're searching by author, and we're looking for a book title. So this information here is relevant to our and this one is not. So given that these are the authors, we don't really need to have the author repeated or what format it's in or what price. That doesn't mean that there might not be another scenario that you want to test for price. Are we pulling the right thing up? But we want to do those independently. Think of the way you do unit tests. You don't want a ton of different asserts. So this isn't bad, but the keywords are wrong. This will run. But this should be a when, because the point of having these keywords is not just that the Gherkin interpreter understands them and can create your tests and run them properly, but that human beings can also understand them. So this is the when, this is our action, and that should use the word when, but it doesn't. This is the and, that's an action. And it should specify that's not the action, that's the then part. That's our post condition. So that's what we're expecting. That's what would be equivalent to an assert in a unit test. So now we have something that's a lot better. In our successful book search by author, we have just the right amount of information that we know. We're searching for Morgan, and we should only find cucumber and cheese in the results. This is a book written by a fellow called Jeff Morgan, whose nickname is Cheesy. I do not know why. I have worked with the man, but he has never told me why that's his nickname.
Camille, I think we got a question, and Chris feel free to just.
Oh,
blurt
yeah,
it
you have
out.
to pop in for questions. What's your question?
Yeah. So what happens when the business comes back and says, well, I do want to see, cucumber and cheese with the price and the format and, these 20 other details.
We break them into separate tests.
Okay.
We break them into separate scenarios. You do not, like with your unit tests, you don't want one test to be dependent on another. In this, as a matter of fact, testing in general follows a similar sort of structure. We want to test for one thing at a time. And in general, the way Cucumber and the other tools work is they will run your tests like JUnit, etc., in random order. The exception to that is SpecFlow. The default for the C# implementation is to run everything in the exact order. So there's a way to change that so that it runs it randomly, which you want to do. If you're in the C# environment, and Joel, since you are,
I love C#.
You can probably go dig into that and give some folks some information or a link on how they can fix their spec flows so that it runs in random order. That is Joel's homework. Haha.
And there's a gentleman named Bob Allen in our community that loves spec flow too.
Okay, maybe Bob can put this in.
But we will do that. We will put that in the bio down low. By the way, if you have questions, just feel free to blur them out. Reminding you, we are streaming this on the internet right now. So if you don't feel comfortable identifying yourself, leave your camera off, stay on mute, and drop your questions in a chat window, and Nick or I will pick it up. Nick just got a job he didn't know he had.
All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do an exercise. So I'm going to ask you all to participate and turn your mics on. We're going to look at some gherkin examples. Some of these are examples of good gherkin, and some of them are examples of bad gherkin. Okay? The bad example problems that we'll see is things that are too vague, too technical, too scripty, too detailed, or it's missing a keyword, or the keyword is misused. And there may be more than one problem in this. Okay? Sound good?
How many story points do we get if this works?
As many as you want.
And also, my Scrum Master wants to know how many story points this is going to cost us.
I'm going to ignore that. Okay? All right. So this is our first exercise. All right. Online shopping. Is this good gherkin or bad gherkin?
Bad.
Okay, what's wrong with it?
It's too vague.
Yep. Right, you are. How about this?
Scripty.
Yeah.
How about that? Yeah.
That's scripty. That's exactly what the problem with this one is. It's discussion on being the home page, typing into a search field, the click button, very definitely too scripty. How about that one? By the way, at the time of creating this, those were actually the right numbers. I live in Maryland.
Incorrect.
What was that?
It seems fine. Yeah, I don't know. This seems okay, except for that some really weird tag tools there. Yeah. Actually, no. This actually it is correct. Like I think 6% of 50 is free, right?
Yep, that's good. This one is good. This one is okay. You know, maybe we could have a little verbiage here, but that's not absolutely required. That's optional. How about that one?
Wrong verbiage. Yeah.
Where is it wrong and why?
I think the end, you know, this there's two extra ends. Probably one of them should be then, and then like maybe then I think those are then, right? Then
So
those
yeah,
are-
so this line here where it says, and I should receive $150, that should be a then. These are our expected results. So this one should be a then, and that sort of keys you into knowing that the other and is related to that. It's not, those are not part of the wins. They are not part of the actions. They're part of the expected results. Okay. How about this one?
I think it's a little vague. I think.
What part's vague?
It's like should see my confirmation quickly. What does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
getting a
So
confirmation?
what are we talking about? We're talking about an hour, a microsecond, how many seconds? And this is something that you can put in with some concrete information. This is something that you should be talking to your business people about. It's going to differ depending on what kind of audience you have. So unfortunately, it's a true thing that if you have a captive audience, that is, they can't go to another product because it's an internal in-house application that you're writing, it can take longer and you can still keep them. However, it probably shouldn't take longer. And if you have any kind of competition in the world, people get really frustrated and move on to using another app if they don't get a reasonably quick one confirmation. So you and your business folks and somebody probably in marketing should figure out what that needs to be and have this one where it can actually run and check how long it takes to do this. Okay, so absolutely right there. Okay. How about this one?
Well, it doesn't have a feature.
Yep, that's one of the things that's wrong with it. It needs feature. Will not run without that.
It has a poor selection of music too.
It was intended to be eclectic.
You've probably got a couple of extraneous columns there. Probably don't
Mhm.
need that.
We
Yeah.
have a brush graduate asking what a CD is. I was being sarcastic, Camille.
Thank you. Yes. So this is it's missing feature and it's too detailed.
Mm.
All righty. How about this one? And you may need to move if you're showing up with hello. Let's shrink this a second so I can see. So how about our using Ajax situation?
Too scripty.
Well, so you'd think so. And in most cases, it would be. But this is one of those rare exceptions where what we're doing is we're checking, this assumes that in order to learn how to test Ajax as a student, I want to practice Ajax testing. And in the practice of that, I actually need to test Ajax itself. So this is something that I'm actually doing with the browser. And I actually want to see these messages and so on. And that show the pop. So this is a rare case, and there are some rare cases where the script matters. There's also an interesting situation. So the first two you can see are about using pop-ups. The last one is on a totally different application on the world population page. And you can see it doesn't have the concrete data you normally would expect. Why do you think that? Any guess?
Well, it's making the assumption that the world population is always increasing, but maybe it changes over time. You don't know exactly how much it's going to increase.
Yes, that's exactly the case. And I don't think even during COVID that the population decreased. So the only way we can test this is to, use Ajax to capture the dynamic information at one point in time of what the world population is, and then immediately go capture it again. And it will be, and then we will check whether it's greater. And that's the only way so this is an exception to the usual rule if we don't want any scripty stuff. Okay. All right. Save. Oh, escape. Stop sharing.
And if you're watching on
Stop
LinkedIn,
sharing.
if you're watching on LinkedIn, which I know we have a lot of people watching on LinkedIn, feel free to join our Slack right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Link is down here.
So now I need to go find my slides again. Excuse me, and share them.
And we're doing this live, right, Camille?
We're doing. Yes, we're doing this live, which is always so much fun when all of a sudden.
Yep. While we're waiting.
There we go. Okay, I'm back to being able to find my stuff. All righty.
We're coding. We're filling time until Camille can get the PowerPoint back up.
Okay, Camille now has the PowerPoint. All right, yes. Okay, so we just did that.
Do you want to share your screen maybe?
Oh, yeah, it would be a good idea. Let me share my screen. That would be helpful.
Nick, that was your job.
Yeah, it is my job to share my screen.
But Nick was supposed to remind you.
Thank you.
Oh, well, next time. Yeah.
We're losing,
Okay.
you lose 10 story points.
Okay. So,
Damn.
great screen. So everybody can see my messy screen again, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so now let's go move this out of the way. And current slide. Okay, move that out of the way so I can actually see stuff. All right. Okay, so we just did this. We just did this exercise. And now we're going to look at some more complicated Gherkin, and with it some more interesting anti-patterns. But there's one thing I want to throw in here. Bob mentioned it last time that we hadn't discussed a rule, and I promised him that's Bob Allen, that we would discuss it this time. And that is this is an optional way to group scenarios together. Now, for instance, on the last thing that we just saw about Ajax, you notice the first two were dealing with pop-ups, and they were dealing with a standard Google example of pop-ups that it has. And the last one was on the population page, on the world population. So we could have used a rule to logically group those together. Sometimes it can just be to make it more useful to understand what goes together. And sometimes we'll see in a moment that there are things that we can use that for. To take advantage of new Gherkin keywords and features that we haven't used yet. So what's wrong with this specification by example, behavior-driven development, whatever we want to call it? What's wrong with this?
It's 2 steps, isn't it?
Well, these are the steps. It's actually 6 steps, but you're on the right track.
Is it technically 2 different scenarios?
Yes, it's 2 different scenarios. Remember, we want our tests to be separate. And there's even a kind of a clue here as we've got 2 thens, 2 whens, etc. This should be a given. So we basically have, this is our an example of a scenario that's too long because it's multiple scenarios. And as is common in that case, we've misused a keyword. So how do we fix that? Well, we fix it by making it 2 scenarios. Okay, given I need to have a change for one. Now, you'll notice that I'm using the word sense here in both cases instead of sent and sense. There's a reason for that. And the reason is, so that's not the ideal English, but when these are our steps, okay? This is our scenario, and our givens, our whens, our thens, and our ands are all steps. When that gets turned into what we call step definitions, that's the technical side that's either written in Java or C# or Python or Ruby or what have you. The wording needs to be identical. So that's why the English is a little strange here. Okay. So this fixes it into having 2 different ones. And ideally, this will be run and you don't know which order the scenarios will be run in. Okay. So like with your N units or J units or R specs or whatever, they should be run randomly. Now, here is another example of something that's way too long and has too many steps. And you can see that there's only one when, then, but still, we're doing different things here. We have one piece of this that's looking at how we log in. We've got another piece of this that's looking at what happens with the credit scores once we're logged in. You want to separate things like that out. So here we've separated out the maxing out the cards part. And in the real world, we are going to have to mock certain pieces of this out because in the real world, credit bureaus only update their credit reports once a day. And we don't want our tests to take multiple days to run. But at least you get the concept of that this part is dealing with, and we haven't defined what maxing out all the credit cards are, but that at least we've pulled this out and we could probably make it better. And we'd have another piece looking back there that deals with logging in. Now, this works, but you'll notice that our wording is different. So this isn't reusable. And we want to make our wording identical. This is something that you're going to need to have a discussion when you're, and this is the reason that I like to have a three amigos, not just the business people writing it, or not just the testers writing it, or not just the devs writing it, but everybody getting together and having, you know, a solid thinking on how do we want to word this stuff, because this might well be the way the business folks would write them, and they write them in different times. And somebody is going to know, either a dev or a tester, that, hey, last time we wrote it using this wordage, we should use the same one the next time. Because otherwise, when I have what are basically 4 steps, but with different data here, that I would instead get 8 different steps that are implemented, and you don't want to do that. So how do we fix it? Well, we fix it by agreeing on what the words are. So now it's common. My checking account has a balance of. My checking account has a balance of. Instead of saying in one case it has a starting balance, in another case saying it has a balance. When I attempt to withdraw, and you could just say when I withdraw, but whatever, when I attempt to withdraw, instead of saying one case I withdraw and the other case saying I attempt to withdraw, and there could be a reason for saying I attempt, because you might have another test where you try and withdraw more money than there is. And again, that I should receive, as opposed to saying that this should be dispensed and I should receive. Just agree on what the words are. And again, ending balance and new balance, we've just changed it to new balance. So really important to have the words be identical. Now, this is not going to be obvious initially if you haven't worked with Gherkin, that this isn't reusable. Standard stoplight colors, I think throughout the world, is that we have red, yellow, and green. Red is stop, yellow is that we should start thinking about stopping, and green is that we can go. And the standard transition is that we move from yellow to red, and from green to yellow, and from red to green. But instead of having just basically 4 statements here, 4 step definitions, we have a number more, because while you and I can tell that yellow is a keyword, and that it's a parameter here, rather, not keyword. These are the keywords, the given, the and, the when, the then, the scenario, feature, etc. The computer can't. So our solution for this, now you saw with earlier ones that we had $signs, and this will depend on your implementation of Gherkin, whether or not $sign is it is in the Ruby version, but I believe in some other versions you have to have the word dollar instead. Okay, but in this case, this won't work at all, and our solution is simply to stick it in quotes. So now that we've stuck it in quotes, we only have 4 steps. Okay. Now we fixed it. It only has 4 steps, but there's an awful lot of duplication here. And maybe with 2 or 3 of them, that's not too bad, but you can imagine other situations where you're testing a whole bunch of things and there's more than those 3 options. So there's this thing called scenario outline. And it's a slightly different structure here. we have our feature and we have our user story or other text as we had before. This time, instead of saying scenario, we say scenario outline. And we think about some sort of theme. For instance, we could have had in our example, where we were looking at Ajax, we could have had a pop-up theme and a world population theme, and we could have separated those out as themes. Actually, that would be more rules, so excuse me there. But in this case, what is the thing that we have in common here? Well, in the common, what we have is stoplight transitions, okay? And that we have given, when, then, maybe with some ands in it, maybe not. And we have a variety of input parameters. And then we have our post condition. We have some sort of event in our post condition. And we might have an and, not too many, and our post condition parameters. By the way, the structure of this with the greater than, less than signs and the underscores is critical. That's the way Gherkin knows. And you don't have to have these bars perfectly lined up, but it does make it a whole lot more readable. So then we use the examples and we can run those. So this is how we would convert this to that. Where what we're doing is we're switching our colors on stoplights. We have a starting color and we have an ending color. Yellow to red, green to yellow, red to green. Okay. Now, here's another case of duplication. Slightly different. That all of these are identical. In this case, the given, a when, and the then, and the beginning, the given and the and the first half of the when are all identical in this case. So there's another thing. It's called background that we can use. So we can pull out a common given with maybe an and sometimes, not often, but there's a when that might be a common. It will be in our case here. And then we have a number of scenarios that go with that, where the other parts of the steps are unique. And usually the when is unique, but in our particular case, here it isn't. So here, the given, I've been issued a new card. When I insert that card with the correct PIN and I choose that, that applies to both scenarios. Now, the last anti-pattern I want to talk about is file organization. So when you are creating a Gherkin file, where should you put it?
In Git.
Yes, exactly. In Git or whatever your tool is that you use to store your code, because Gherkin is code. And very commonly, you will find, particularly in large companies that like to use agile project management tools, whether they be Rally or Jira or version 1 or what have you, they will ask you to put it in that tool. Okay. Now, the problem with that is that all of these tools are organized by time. They're time boxed. Okay. You've got sprint 1 or iteration 1, whatever you want to call it, followed by 2, followed by 3, followed by 4, etc. But that's not a good way to organize your Gherkin. You want your Gherkin organized by common functionality so that you can find things, so that you can see where something you might reuse, not have to go look through your entire project management tool. Moreover, it's real code, so it's got to be executed. What this means is that if you are in a large company where they've got separate testers or BAs or what have you, those people need access to your code repository. Or you need to have a dev pair with them and work with them in the code repository. Anyway, okay, so the good organization is that we put it in the code repository, which is our system of record, and we organize it that way for our specification by example or behavior-driven development or whatever we want to call it. And that it's organized by business functionality, not by time. Again, that'll be simpler. So think about if you had a music collection, you might organize it by genre. You might organize it by artist. You would not organize it by the date you bought it. Okay? Or if you had books, on a bookshelf, if you were organizing them, they would not be organized by the date you bought them. Put the agile management tool would be equivalent to organizing it by the date you bought it. Okay, so now we're going to go look at another exercise. And we're going to look at some examples. And there are going to be some good examples and there are going to be some bad examples. So again, we're going to have the option of it being too vague, too technical, too scripty, too detailed, keywords missing, or steps that are keywords missing or misused. But now we're also going to look at things that are too long, or either because it's got multiple scenarios or just plain too many steps and probably should be broken into multiple scenarios. That's usually not reusable because the wording needed to be identical, but it wasn't. Not reusable because you needed to put quotes around things. That it had duplication but was otherwise reusable, or there was just plain bad file organization. And like before, there can be more than one reason for something not being good. So we're going to go now on to our next exercise. Okay, goodbye Gherkin exercise 1, go to Gherkin exercise 2. Okay. And we will share that. Okay, play from current slide.
And Camille, we've added people to the audience. Just want to remind them to come
Oh.
off mute and shout it out.
Yeah, excellent. So here is our first situation. Is this good Gherkin or bad Gherkin? And if it's not good, why? If it is good, why?
There should be different scenarios. There's more than one scenario here.
Yep.
Did you read the whole thing or just look at the length of it?
It's also too long.
Yes. So too long often means multiple scenarios.
It is too long, but it's also using the keyword given multiple times, which is a key there for there's multiple scenarios.
Kind of a dead giveaway, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. How about this one?
Too vague.
Okay,
How much money am I transferring?
it's vague. There's no concrete data.
The bank
Have
seems
to-
suspicious too.
What's that?
The bank seems suspicious too. Are the FDIC insured?
Good question. Okay. How about that one?
Another duplication in the givens.
Yep, we've got some duplications in the given, so we could put that in a background, perhaps.
I mean, overall, they look pretty good to me so far.
Well,
I think there's too much detail than the page should be displayed.
uh-huh.
To me, that harks to implementation detail as well. So I don't know. We could probably live without that.
Mm-hmm.
You architecture anarchist.
Okay. There's
Well,
one. There's at least one other thing here.
The page should be redisplayed as kind of. I think that's too implementation specific.
Yeah, that's
potentially.
too implementation specific. That's true.
Well, and then shouldn't the and I should see all that be in quotes after that?
Absolutely. Yes. So the end I should see this part. Whoops, hello. That's not what we were trying to do. The end I should see the cards must be 6. This should be in quotes because this is an error message that should be displayed. Okay. So, great. All right. How about this one? And as you're seeing my eclectic interest in music.
Too scripty again.
It's too scripty.
I love the
Yeah, you
jQuery
can-
specification or whatever that is.
That's part of the too scripty.
Yeah. All right. Oh, we don't need those IDs. You can get rid of those.
Yes,
Um,
so it's too technical. We do not need the keys and the foreign keys in this. We really don't.
And
Um,
I would say the dev.music, dev.album, unless that's a band.
I know it's not a band. It's a
You never know.
It's an element.
yep, it's an element. So
I think a business person would have trouble, or like a product owner would, or stakeholder would have trouble understanding this because click.
I think you're right.
But I've worked with
Element,
some software
yeah.
managers that would do this.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Oh no, for sure. No, I hey man. Back at our old,
One was
our old
named Mark
shared
H.
client, I've seen these almost exact tests. Wait, what?
One was
Okay.
named Mark.
Yeah.
Sounds like an inside joke.
Well, Mark's talking.
Oh, okay. How about this one?
Hate that feature name.
Yeah, that's not a good one. Also, there isn't like, well, no, there's data here.
It's very tautological.
Tautological.
You use the word order in database, which is confusing. There's a context switch.
Uh-huh.
Didn't think about
I
that.
don't know. I think I'd rather use a flat file here, not a database, though.
Well,
Do you know how many orders you have?
That was what I was. That first one has no like data to it at all. Like,
yep. It doesn't.
I wish I could say I've never seen a gherkin like this before in my career. It's I mean, it's not testing, at a user acceptance level.
Right.
This looks like someone's trying to test a repository or database.
That's exactly what it's doing. This is probably something that you'd be using. This is more an integration test, if you would. Now you can use Cucumber and Gherkin for that, but it's really not a specification by example. Now, assuming that we actually did want to test the database, we could put a rule in here between the first and the second scenario. And then we could take at least no, that probably wouldn't help much anyway. So something of a mess. But the given I have an order for something could be specified better. But it's mostly okay, but there is only reason it might be okay is that we're actually trying to test a database. But again, this is not something that you'd want with your business folks. This would be something as an integration test.
And there's no logic, like, or update a record named Donald Duck, expect to see Donald Duck. There's no logic there, right?
Nope.
And it's not just like about integration. I mean, I've seen this with APIs, right? Where, what's that? I'm sorry.
I wasn't saying anything. I was listening to you.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's standard CRUD, right? But like,
it is standard CRUD.
If we're doing standard CRUD, we probably don't need Gherkin. But I've seen this in APIs, right? Especially when you're quote RESTful, because then you get these CRUD and it becomes very, when I submit a request, I get a success. And it's like, what do you mean by success? Like, what do you yeah.
Okay. All right. So definitely not a business level scenario. If this belongs in Gherkin, questionable. How about this?
Too long.
Okay. Yeah. That's a nice start. What else is around?
I go back to your Sparrow deck talk.
Mm-hmm. Well, so what's typically, when something's too long, what's typically one of the problems?
Well, is this really all registration? I mean, this seems like another scenario. This seems like another case of multiple scenarios.
Yes, it is a case of multiple scenarios. That's absolutely true. What else is wrong? So we've got two things. It's too long. It's got multiple scenarios.
Any steps?
What's that?
Too many steps.
Yeah, it's too many steps, but that's part of being too long.
There's actually two hashtags saying like there's a medical checkup and personal detail. Like this person is pretty much saying that there's other scenarios, but they just don't want to write the other scenarios.
So yeah, there's all of these things here, but there's sometimes we have something we're checking against, and other times it's just kind of vague. So what about this? Given I navigate to myapp.com.
Too scripty, isn't it?
Yeah, it's too scripty.
Wouldn't you put
And
like
the
on the login?
Yeah, the user forcibly clicks on gender mail.
I was wondering
So
what the forcible
pretty
click is.
So that's better than a double click. That's when you're pound your trackpad.
Okay, so lots wrong with this one. How
So
about
as a
that?
rule of thumb, maybe you might have already talked about this, so sorry, but if I see the filling of data and the submitting of data, I would usually group under one action.
Yep.
Um,
So you want to, oops, nothing. So where were we? Yes, we were here. So you want to break this into multiple parts. You know, logging in, submitting some data, checking what it is. So lots of scenarios. Okay, how about writing our comments to the block? What do we see here?
Duplication.
Yes. What could we do about that duplication? Where do we see the duplication?
In the givens.
Huh?
The whens are almost all the same.
Tableize it.
I mean, this would be what do you call it? The background. You would have a
Background.
background for this.
Exactly. Background. So background's needed for this. And that's the major thing.
Yeah, the first two lines are always the same, aren't they?
The first
Given
three are
and the
always
and.
the same.
Yeah.
Now, you will notice that although the first three lines are the same, that the then is different in all of them. And what this does, after we put it in background and get that other stuff out of that, is it makes it separate tests. So that we test for whether it's empty comment, we test for whether, you know, we've got an error message, we test for a couple of different things. Do I have that in twice? Anyway, I will have to double check on that. How about this cash withdrawal?
Different wording.
Yes, exactly. That's the problem with this one. It's different wording. How about this one?
Is it? Go ahead.
What's that?
I mean, the starting balance is a parameter, right? Why aren't there? Well, I guess they're putting their detail in the examples.
The details in the examples.
Yeah. Okay.
That's exactly what's happening here.
Okay.
So is this, do we see any problems or is this good?
I think we're all scared to say it's good. So I think Nick should say it's good and then find out if he's right or wrong.
I'm struggling to find an error with this.
Actually, the last scenario isn't that seems suspiciously similar to the first and the second one, isn't it? Like,
well, there's a slight difference in the second, you're talking about here, the multiple withdrawals.
yeah.
Okay, so what we're checking here, and the reason it's not in this is that we're checking because the first time through, we're checking that it's updating quickly. Okay. because I'm withdrawing $20. That ought to be okay. I'm going to have $80 left. Now I'm trying to withdraw $100. Now that shouldn't be okay. So $0 should be dispensed, and I should get this error message, which is very, very too much rude. And your business or product people or BA or whoever is representing that side of the house would notice that that was too rude and should be changed. But it is a little different because sometimes it's important to check that if I do something and I do something again, it noticed and it's updating things correctly. So that's why this part here is not just when I withdraw $120.
I
They seem
mean,
like separate transactions to me, but I don't know. It's a different interface, I guess.
well, one thing here is that sorry, but you're broke is not like that one's manually written at the very bottom. So if somebody decides to change the message, it's
If you change the message, then you will need to change the tests.
yeah, you have to change in 3 places, right? But I mean, if somehow they were able to get it in one place, I mean, it's the same alert, right? So
Well, so there are different thoughts about testing. And if I were writing a unit test, I would probably pick up that message from some sort of table that I had, so it was easy to change. And maybe you might do that in your Gherkin. But the most important thing about Gherkin, and this is more important that they're not in, it's more important than not having duplication, is that it be readable. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's okay to have duplication if it makes it more readable than if you don't. So usually I like to have error messages explicitly in my Gherkin. Whoops, whoa, we're not supposed to be there yet. Hello, let's go back to.
Did we get all the answers now?
I have them.
Now we're gonna have to send our certifications back, Nick.
Yeah.
We'll be Gherkin certified at the end of this.
Okay. So I
That
have the
representative
Gherkin
will be visiting you
certification.
soon.
Sorry about that. So the last thing here I have for you, unless you want to talk about this some more, but I think we're done talking about this. Anything else?
I'm done.
Yeah.
I just want to point out, sorry, but there's a typo with the capital B there.
Oh, good point.
I thought that was part of one of the mistakes, but I think I'm being pedantic.
So this is probably something that your business person, besides saying, hey, that this is really too rude, we should say something else. We should let them know that they don't have any money in the bank, sufficient money to do that. So, insufficient funds might be a more polite way to say it, but they would probably also notice that, yeah, the grammar has problems.
I'm going, dude, you're broke. I'd rather go, dude,
I think
you're
I'd
broke.
send it over to legal myself, and we'd have to wait 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Oh, I've had that problem. I've
It would
had
come
that
back
problem.
with funds insufficient.
I've had the challenge where the Spanish webpage and the English webpage were translated by somebody clearly in legal. And it was absolutely terrible Spanish, and they wouldn't let us fix it. What's wrong with this?
It's in Jira.
Yep.
Oh, that was my sarcastic remark.
No, that's absolutely, that is the big problem with this. And it would be just as bad if it were in Rally or version 1 or some other tool.
And there's no story points on it.
This is, by the way, I screen captured a description in Jira of what you're supposed to do. So this is my recommendation of what not to do. because this should be in your code repository. It's got some other issues. It's a little scripty and stuff like that. But the big thing I wanted to point out is what Joel immediately jumped on. And I don't think this is Joel, that it's just because it's not your company's tool.
Oh, I don't care about my company's tool. I'm just saying it's Jira.
I was gonna say, is this a user story? Because if it is, it's terrible.
As a developer, I don't want any of the tools.
No.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a poor user story to start with. But in addition, the major thing is that it shouldn't be in an Agile project management tool. It should be in your code repository.
And I don't see story points listed here. I don't know how I will ever estimate.
Okay.
I'm going to cut them a bit. Honestly, I'm going to cut them a bit of slack. If we want to start there and document it there because we don't have it in code repository yet, I'm okay with it.
Progress, right?
Uh-huh.
Even if you're doing the right things in the wrong spot, it's better than doing nothing.
As long as you get to the right spot. Yeah, that's fine.
So here's a checklist to kind of get started on thinking about things. And you can also, of course, review this presentation, and there's lots of other information out there. There's some good books, by the way. Specification by Example is one of the good ones. There is the Cucumber book that is focused on Ruby, but the general information is good. There's also a Cucumber for Java book. I haven't seen a Cucumber for Spec Flow. That goes into some details, which we have both of those, which we haven't gone into, and that is how do we turn these step definitions into, or rather, how do we turn these steps into step definitions that can actually talk to the back end code that we have, or sometimes the front end code, depending on how you're doing it. Cucumber and Cheese, which uses the Ruby version of Cucumber, is a really nice step-by-step description, except when it gets to the one use on Ajax, if I remember, because the example they're using doesn't exist anymore on Google's website. If you're interested, I have one that does work, or at least it worked last I saw it. So generic checklist, scenarios, BD, behavior-driven development, whatever you want to call it. They need to be clear, unambiguous, concrete examples. Given when, then, and other keywords need to be used correctly. They need to be short. So I like to strive for less than 10 lines. If it's 20 lines, that's really too long. I think more than 10 is generally too long. Needs to be, we did see one example that I think might have been more than 10 that I showed you from the Fannie Mae mortgage calculator, but it was close to 10. That's earlier in the presentation. That's a real example, by the way. Not at least the application is real, and the scenarios with the details are real. Needs to be business focused. That is not scripty, technical, or too detailed. Spelling, grammar, spacing, and wording needs to be consistent. Oh, and there's another gotcha, which I think has been improved in the more recent versions of Cucumber, Spec Flow, Behave, and their Gherkin, which is that sometimes you will run into a problem. It's not really how that you're writing it wrong. It's a limitation in the tool that if like the first 5 words are not unique, or maybe it's the first 7 if they've improved it, it will think that it's the same step definition as another one that has variations toward the end. So that's something just to be careful about in the tool. I think that has been improved since the last time I saw it. It may not have been. Earlier versions, certainly it was a problem. But in any case, the spelling, grammar, spacing, wording needs to be the same for the same thing. Organize them so that they've got related functionality and put them together, and not too many scenarios in a single Gherkin feature. Create separate features for them. And I think, yep, I think that's it. Any questions? If we have some extra time and you want to, I think I may show you an example of what it looks like when you turn them into step definitions from steps. Questions?
So I guess since I've never seen how it really works then, so the software takes the scenarios and everything and actually turns that into code.
Okay, so I will share this with you. Let me get
Go to
out of
magic.
it. Yep, well, I'm not going to do it live, but I will show you some examples. Hang on a second.
Camille has
Okay.
decades
Hang
of
on.
presenting. That's why she's not doing a live code demo. She knows what will happen.
Yeah, well, I know people so one of the things that's Cheesy Morgan, as I was mentioning, does amazing live code demos.
Are you sure they're live or not recorded videos?
I get fumbled fingers. No, I've seen him do plenty of live ones. Let's see, where is that? Show recent. Let me look for it because I've got a nice example somewhere. File, open recent. I think it's in here. Yep. Let me look. Okay. So. All righty. We've seen this bit and that bit. So how does this bit get turned into? So when you run, for the first time you run your feature online, it will create, and this is what a step definition looks like when it's put together. Now this happens to be a Ruby example. It will look a little bit different in Java or another language. And this is what it looks like when you actually run it. So in this case, when you see it, if you're running it on the command line, and depending on your computer, on a Mac, you don't need to do anything special to turn on the color coding. You do if you're running it on a Windows machine, at least last I looked. This indicates that the first 3 steps have been run. This one has not. This one has actually failed. So how do we get from there? And this is the code that would be under test. Again, this is a Ruby example. How does that happen? Okay. So in our cash withdrawal example, we've got these steps. They are unimplemented. I'm running them from the command line to kind of show you what would happen. And this is the first half of what you see. Now you see this part where it says you can implement these step definitions from these snippets. These are the snippets that it gives you. And again, this is the Ruby version, but it'll be really similar in any other programming language you're giving. And this is a regex that it will show. This is how it tells it apart. And then it'll give you this pending keyword temporarily. And that's where you're going to stick your code in. And when it has an argument, as it's automatically new because we had a $sign, or if it sees numbers, or if you have something that's a string, it will like do arg1, whatever. You're going to need to change that to something, obviously. So this is what it would look like. Okay, so our first step is I've changed arg1 to starting balance, and the next one I've changed to withdraw, and then I've changed to dispense. And I still have these pending steps. Okay, so now it says that this is pending. And this light blue here are steps that have been skipped. Now I've implemented my first one. This is, I have an account class that was created, and it has a starting balance. And I'm taking this, and this is something that's important because everything that it's sending you here is in a string form. Okay. Now it knows, going back here, to take the $sign out. Okay. And that's a number, but it's not sending you a number as an integer. Oh, it's sending you it as a string. So in whatever language you're doing, when you take that and you implement it as stating my given, okay, so I've got my account, I'm making a local variable here called my FM Fannie Mae Credit Union. And I'm taking this to making it to integer. Okay. So now, if I'm following the BDD pattern, which is that I've written my test before I've written my code, that now goes red because there's no account. So now I create an account class. Again, this is a Ruby example, but again, a different language. And it has, I've initialized it, which is your constructor. And it has this thing called opening deposit. And now that I've done that, now that line goes green. So now the when I withdraw $20 is pending. And this cycle repeats. So I start with some small piece of functionality we'll call a user story. I write a scenario for that. This is under this bigger thing called feature. And I create those step definitions, or I create the steps. So the scenario has the steps. And then from that, I have this step definition from the snippets, which just has this pending stuff. Then I turn that pending stuff into the code. If I'm following a behavior-driven development model, which I recommend, you watch it fail. And then we make it pass by evolving the code. Are there any more pending steps? If necessary, we keep going. If no, then we're done with the scenario. And that's basically how it works. And I don't have the demo ready for you. I can do a demo at a different time if you'd like.
No, that's cool. Thank you.
Okay, so that was a little extra I wasn't planning to do tonight, but there we are. Any other questions?